Catus, Maximus here, this time with a review of the Tekton 2-piece 3/8 and 1/4 inch stubby ratchet set. This is indeed the box it comes in. I kind of actually like the design, and it even has an always guaranteed there. What I did like, or I was actually kind of surprised, is I thought there were two individual ratchets that were just being put together by the seller. I got these off of eBay. But Tekton's actually selling this as a set. There's even a nice little pad, so it's actually pretty well packaged up. And then it's in this pretty heavily taped package. There, now we'll be able to get it open. And here's our first one. This would be the 3/8. There it is. Interesting. Actually looks pretty nice. And then down here we have our 1/4 inch, if I can get it out of here. There it is. Let's get this out of here. They are actually in individual plastic bags in the bubble wrap, so pretty well matched. This is what I was really after with the set, but since I have been into stubby ratchets, I figured I'd go for both. It's actually interesting that there's an undercut here on the 3/8, but it isn't on the 1/4 inch. Now, I think these, I'll have to double check, but I think these are somewhere in the range of 72 or 80 teeth. They're pretty fine. Nice little reverse levers. I do like that they are recessed in here with just a little bit of protrusion, but with the thickness of the handle, you can tell that it just barely is riding on that reverse lever, so that is pretty well protected. Actually, maybe if we look at the 3/8, it would be a little bit easier to see. Come on now. There we go. We can see that it's riding flush against the surface of the ratchet. So if it gets dropped and something impacts right on the switch, it isn't cantilevered out. So I actually like the look of that. It is Tekton. They are cheap tools, but these do look pretty nice. You can see they do use laser etching because, of course, that's more cost effective than doing a physical stamping. As far as back drag, not too bad on the 3/8. The 3/8 feels just fine. The reverse lever actually has a nice solid feel to it, so it's not too hard to flip, but it feels like it's going to stay in position properly. And same thing on the 1/4 inch. Not too bad on the back drag. Let's check anvil play. That's actually not bad. That's pretty good. In and out, no, not at all. That's really pretty satisfying. How about on the 3/8? Good. I really like that. The ratchets have some pretty tight anvils. Other points of quality would be just how well the centering of or not the stamp, but the swaging for the ball retention, pretty nicely centered there on the 1/4 inch, and on the 3/8, also pretty well centered. Let's get a better look at that. Maybe not perfectly, but still more than good enough. Here we go. I had to get some sockets so I could really feel how strong the detents are on these. Definitely not as strong as the OEM ratchet that I worked on or that I reviewed just previously, but it's still not bad. This is more than satisfying. And on the 1/4 inch, a lot of times 1/4 inch ends up being pretty soft, but no, that's actually just fine. Real satisfying. So these aren't bad. I think it was right around $20 or $25 for the pair of these shipped, so I thought it was more than worth it, and I'm really into these little ratchets, and that's what this is just like a regular heavy-duty 1/4 inch ratchet, just with a super short handle. And the 3/8 one I didn't really need, but I would just like the idea of having some more ratchets. I'll compare it to a couple. The 3/8 I would say is on the kind of longer end of stubby ratchets. I mentioned that before about the icon. Of course, in this instance, yeah, I would say that the icon is better. The icon would have a much larger pawl, I'm sure, but I like this Tekton as well, and I do kind of like the way the design is and the way it's set up, and I do like that switch. That is actually much heavier duty, but we can see that it's about the same length as the icon being a large one. Here's that little mini stubby, that O'Reilly's Power Torque. The video actually did pretty well for me, and it's actually quite a bit smaller than this Tekton, so there's a quick size comparison. The little 1/4 inch one, I think, is just actually a little bit more competitive. I have some real small 1/4 inch ratchets here. I do have one of the old Titan clutch ratchets. Obviously, it's not quite as small as this. This Titan ratchet is super tiny, super thin, but this Tekton is still pretty competitive. And here's another Titan offset ratchet. we can see that surprisingly enough, the Tekton, if we get anvil to anvil, is even a little bit shorter than the super compact Titan, even though the Titan doesn't have quite as large a diameter head. It's still pretty competitive, and actually it's thinner than this little Titan. I like that these were sealed heads, so no through hole. This is going to be just a little bit stronger. Obviously in a Stubby, the strength isn't as much of a concern, but it's still kind of nice just to have a nice sealed head ratchet, and when you have a solid anvil, you always kind of feel real confident about it. And I assume these are the part numbers here, kind of odd part numbers, and they're not like sequential between both of these. Anyway, I just wanted to do a quick kind of overview. This is that other power torque. This is that super micro quarter-inch ratchet, just to show that even it is actually longer than this Tekton, although obviously head size. This is the smallest quarter-inch ratchet I've ever seen. I think these Tektons are great, and to tell you the truth, I would have paid the 20 bucks or whatever it was. It was right around there. I forget the exact price, just for this little quarter-inch one, just because these things, I think these little tiny ratchets are the ones I really use quite often, especially in so many places. I mean, it's just so much equipment, and on automobiles, so many places where there's just so little space to have it. You can get a bolt broken, but actually running it in and out within a reasonable amount of effort, really these tiny little ratchets. And I like this thing because it's just like a heavy-duty steeled ratchet, but just super tiny. I mean, much smaller than even this, O'Reilly's mini head one. Really, that's pretty neat, and it's very competitively tiny. Let's take a look inside this 3/8 here. All right, we'll see what kind of, these are T9s. We'll see how well they lube these and if there's any sealing. Definitely pretty tight. Although these screws seem to be formed pretty well. It's always unfortunate when some ratchets don't have very well formed torque screws, because then it really tears up the screws pretty quickly and pretty easily. Get that bottom plate off. We have a little shim washer down there just to help with the spacing and to reduce a little bit of anvil friction. And we can see that it's not a bad design. It is indeed a floating pawl design. I'm not going to give Tekton too much criticism because they've had some really, a lot of people have commented them having a really good warranty. The pawl isn't the largest, but it's a stubby ratchet, so it's definitely not the worst. The comment is, and I mentioned this on the flex head icon, Harbor Freight icons versus the straight handle Harbor Freight icons, is that they use a different switch and ratcheting design, and unfortunately this Tekton is using one like the flex head. What I mean is that this switch is retained by this, you can see the little silver retainer, that's the spring that's actually pushing up on the pawl and providing the ratcheting action. When you reverse it, it just slides it back and forth. We can also see it's basically bone dry in there, so that's also a little bit disappointing. The issue is that there's no independent stop. So if you're ratcheting, and this being in particular a stubby where your hand may be on top of it, if you put just a little bit of pressure on that switch, what ends up happening is what's stopping the switch from, besides being on a small undercut, they just didn't size that quite perfectly. The switch should have really stopped right against this edge, but there's actually a little bit of play. And so it can overshoot. And since they're just using the spring itself, that's a plunger on top of a spring, if you put pressure on it, what ends up happening is it binds that spring, and then of course the ratchet, as you can see, doesn't work. It can end up skipping and having issues if you have pressure on the switch. So that's always just a little bit disappointing. We'll go ahead and pop this out and take a look at the pawl. There is actually, they did put like a couple drops of lubricant in there. It just wasn't as much as I would like. And then let's dump those internal pieces out. There's a odd spring. I do like this design. Instead of them using a pin, they're using a wide plunger. That plunger does look like it's cast zinc or cast steel. You can tell like that little button on there indicating that it's cast, or excuse me, not cast steel, cast aluminum or cast zinc, but this is not steel, so that's a little bit cheaper. The pawl itself, not too bad. It's a reasonable size. If you compare that to engagement, it is more engagement than the Icon flex heads. I will give it that. This is a stronger ratchet mechanism, even though it does share some of the unfortunate design aspects. Just before I get this together, I'm just going to use a little bit of lightweight oil, especially in this type of ratchet mechanism. I've learned my lesson. You don't want to put heavy grease in there because the teeth are so fine that you can get stiction. Either the pawl will get stuck to the anvil and you'll end up with reversing issues, or other situations, especially when the grease gets older and a little bit more stiff. So really, on coarse ratchets, grease can work just fine, but on these finer tooth ones, you really want to find thin oil, sewing machine oil or 3-in-1 or something like that. Not too much. I should also mention that there is I did pop that switch out. There doesn't appear to be any kind of O-ring sealing for this. Hence, I lubed it and it's now all pouring out from around the switch. Oh, that sounds a lot better though. That's actually much smoother, much better. I'm just so surprised that manufacturers are just putting such tiny amounts of oil. I'm not reviewing Snap-on and Matco ratchets, but nonetheless, it can't cost that much and be that much extra of assembly work. So we know Tekton are budget tools. Yes, these Tekton sealed heads are actually quite a bit better than older style Tekton ratchets. These really, for what they are, they're not bad at all. They're just, obviously cheaper tools. But I think the real advantage to this set is this little 1/4 inch, this little thing, even with the various issues, if I push on the lever here, there it goes. I mean, the anvil will just spin around if you push on that lever. But besides that, this little tiny ratchet's going to be something I really like and am going to end up using quite a bit. And so for the price, I think they're just fine. I think it's absolutely meet expectations, and apparently Tekton actually has a pretty good warranty. We can call them and send them a photograph of a broken tool, and they'll just send you another one. So that's a pretty big deal. So if these do break or have some kind of real big issue, or you actually use them enough to where you beat up that plunger where it just doesn't ratchet reliably anymore, Tekton will replace it. And so that goes a long way. So even though it's cheap tools, if they're willing to actually support them and replace them and not make you go through an arm and a leg and dig up receipts and send them a copy of all this type of stuff when you can just show that, you really do have the tool, I think that really goes a long way. So anyway, I just wanted to do a review of these. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.